The July 2021 unrest wrought widespread damage on lives and livelihoods and left the country reeling. At his submission to the South African Human Rights Commission hearings into the matter months later, President Cyril Ramaphosa said, "For 1 week and 1 day in July, as a nation, we stared into the heart of darkness. We watched in horror as parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng were engulfed by violence, looting, destruction and death. Shops, businesses and warehouses were looted and torched, and people were being beaten and humiliated. We felt uncertain, fearful for ourselves, for our loved ones in our country. We felt the greatest sense of betrayal that there were some among us who would go as far as to plot to destroy this very country we've spent the last 28 years to build." Well, let's reflect on the scale and legacy of that moment on businesses in KwaZulu-Natal. And I'm joined by the CEO of the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Palesa, Phili. Good morning, Palesa, and welcome to the program. That statement by the president there, again, sort of places us back into the moment. And I'd love for you to do that with us as well, to go back to the destruction in its early moments and as it began to progress to a point where it was becoming clear that this was widespread and violent.
Good morning, Iman, and good morning to your viewers at home. Certainly, the reflection of the worst disaster and destruction that we've ever had post-democracy is always a very devastating reflection for us to look back on, where we saw citizens of this province and this beautiful city of Durban going to destroy the very businesses that employ them, the very businesses that actually support them, and at the back end of everything else, destroying their own jobs and their own economy. It has brought a lot of devastation, so much that even the reputation of our city and our province is pretty much at stake, where when we have engagements with potential investors into the city, the first thing that they always ask us is, what is happening? Is the city safe? And is the province safe from any sort of unrest? Whenever there's anything that is happening here in our province, for example, we just come back now from elections, the business leaders and business owners in this province are literally sitting at the edge of the chairs because we don't know what is going to be coming and what's going to happen. So it is really, really sad to always be reflecting on these kind of things and knowing, having absolutely no uncertainty of, can this happen again? Will it be stopped? And how can we just make sure that it doesn't happen again in our province?
The report said, Palesa, to the point that you're raising now, that while evidence suggests that the unrest was well orchestrated, the Commission did not receive clear evidence identifying specific groups or individuals as primary actors, while the common purpose or intention behind the action was unclear. How does that sit with you today, that we still don't know directly who was accountable and who was responsible?
You see, that is the problem, because nobody has been held accountable. We had very few people that were arrested, and some of the main instigators have still not been arrested and or questioned in terms of the destruction that they have held, that they've actually brought onto the economy. So we still would like to see people held accountable. We would still like to see people getting arrested for what they have done, because what they have done is not only have they destroyed the economy of the province, but they have destroyed the livelihoods of even the poorest of the poor, because there's a lot of companies that post the unrest were not able to open. People lost jobs and people lost their livelihoods. So somebody needs to be held accountable, and we really would like to see that happen.
So I want to go back to the report itself again, and they also found that police were ill-prepared and under-resourced to deal with orchestrated attacks. They were also unable to respond quickly to address and to counter digital orchestration and instigation through social media and other online platforms, which actually allowed, in hindsight now we know, the unrest to grow. 3 years on, do you believe that these observations have been taken seriously by law enforcement? And as a result, and I think you hinted at that in your first response, do you feel confident that business is safe from attacks like this in future?
I think there's a lot of lessons that we've really learned from what happened with the unrest, especially us here as a province of KZN, together with South African Police Services, where post the unrest, we had frank discussions with the leadership of SAPS in terms of what exactly happened and how can we just make sure that we prevent these kind of things from happening in future. So what we have since done is we have a collaboration, I'd like to call it. I don't want to call it a PPP, but I'd like to call it a collaboration because nothing has been signed down. Where we have got South African Police Services, Metro Police, as well as private security, and different corporates that are based here in KZN, where we identify macro threats that could be coming through to our province. Remember the last, in 2021, the main problem that was there was the issue of not having the intelligence early in time. So now we've seen a very big shift where SAP's intelligence are very proactive. Whenever there's a macro threat that is coming, they're able to come and talk to us and say, how do we prepare? How do we then work with them after they have identified the different hotspots to ensure that we have both private security, SAPS and Metro Police in those hotspots to prevent anything sinister to happen again. So we're a little bit more confident because of the partnership. Just to come back and answer your question, we're more confident. However, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in other areas, such as more the micro crime. But on the macro level, like what we've seen with the elections right now, the collaboration and the threats of ADTF, there's a strong collaboration that we have, and we're seeing that it's actually paying off.
Palesa, I want to go a little bit deeper into those macro threats that you've just been sharing with us. On the one hand, it's really great to hear that collaboration and the coordination of your efforts between yourselves and various law enforcement does seem to be there, and it's got all the recipe, all the ingredients for it to become something really formidable in future. But what are the nature of some of these threats, and how many would you say? Have there been a high level of macro threats identified? And if you can't give us all the details, we totally understand from an intelligence perspective. But just give us a little bit more information on what these threats may look like and the frequency of which they've been coming in.
Okay, look, I mean, let me just start with last year. I mean, it was the Economic Freedom Fund national shutdown. We had a very strong partnership there. That's a macro threat that we did. We did work on with SAPS. We also had a couple of threats of the ADTF shutting down the N3, which is a big problem for us from an economic point of view. And then, of course, most recently, with regards to the elections, I mean, there was a lot of threats that we're getting left, right, and center that were coming from elections, that, there's going to be shutdowns, there's going to be this. And those are the kind of things that were stopped proactively in terms of the partnership that we had with SAPS, as well as the law enforcement agencies and private security working together.
When you talk about the ADTF, this is the All Truck Drivers Forum. We saw some of those vehicles being burnt during various types of protest action. But I just want to just share with our viewers who you're referring to when you talk about the ADTF. Palesa, after the inventory of destruction was complete, we heard that nearly 2 million people across the country were left unemployed. More than 50 billion rand had simply been wiped from the economy as KwaZulu-Natal, most of KwaZulu-Natal and sections of Gauteng came to a standstill. You shared with us some of the legacy effects and the legacy issues in the aftermath of the unrest to business in the province. Just talk to us more about the effects of that moment, even today, in business.
The devastation is still there, Iman, especially when you go into the township businesses, where if you just drive around, a lot of former shops or informal businesses are closed till today because majority of the people that owned those businesses did not have insurance to be able to rebuild post, the unrest. We've got a lot of SMMEs that closed down because they didn't have insurance to rebuild. The bigger companies were able to, because they had insurance, they were able to rebuild, but the devastation is more in the smaller companies, SMMEs, which actually employs majority of the people here within our province. So that is where the biggest devastation is, and that is where we're still reeling from what has happened. And to add, a salt to injury, is that businesses even till today are still leaving our province, still worried about what had happened before, and safety, of course, being one of these key priorities and key things and key reasons that they're actually citing over and above the challenges that we have within our municipality of the infrastructure of water, sanitation, and distribution of electricity. As some of the reasons why they're saying, look, either we're disinvesting or leaving the province. The saddest part and most dangerous part is because these are smaller companies, Iman, and they're not like your large companies. It's not out there, for the news to actually know that company X is now moving or company Y has now closed. But this is the reality of what has happened. The July unrest, the biggest people and the biggest sector that was really, really affected is the Black businesses that were unable to rebuild their businesses and re-employ the people. So the people are suffering right now is those people, as well as, of course, the unemployed people that came, the unemployment that came as a result of majority of those businesses being closed.
Perhaps just as a final word, I mean, I was looking at social media over the last couple of days, and we're talking about a cleanup of Durban, and there's kind of a sense in the air, and I could be wrong, so please correct the perception if it is, of change in the air, of improvement and of growth, kind of looking forward to a turnaround in the economy in eThekwini, but of course in the greater KwaZulu-Natal itself. Would you concur with that? And even though, you're rebuilding from the ashes and you're sharing with us this devastating story of how many businesses have just simply disappeared in the fire and ash of that moment, what's your perception on the future? Are things looking up? Is there likely to be a total recovery and even growth?
Look, as a business community of KZN and eThekwini, we're always overly optimistic that things will work out right. I'm sure you know that we met with the president a couple of months ago. There's a presidential working group that has been established with the 4 key areas that we said to the president. Mr. President, if you can fix the water, sanitation, distribution of electricity, if you can fix the safety and security, which includes what actually happened with the unrest, you can improve the business confidence as well as the tourism, things will be highly improved. So we were very optimistic that through this presidential working group, we will be able to get the necessary support from national government to be able to help us to actually get to improve.